Good morning. Thank you for listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville, Kentucky. This is Artist Talk with LVA, the show produced by Louisville Visual Art, and my name is Keith Waits. Today we're here to talk about the Bill Fisher Award, and I've got two esteemed guests, one of which is completely new to Louisville, so it's great to be able to welcome her. Simone Sibley-McBride joined the Community Foundation of Louisville's Mission and Impact team as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager and Program Manager in December of 2021. Simone is passionate about improving community and organizational equity, systems, and wellness. She supports the foundation in implementing equitable departmental strategies around DEI, anti-racism, grant-making, trust-based philanthropy, scholarship practices, and evaluation of organizational impact. Also with us today, so I guess I always use the phrase old friend of the show, but Jessica Bennett Kincaid has been a curator and writer based in Louisville, Kentucky for several years, and she was recently appointed the Public Art Administrator for Louisville Metro Government. She was previously the manager of permanent collections for 21C Museum, and before that, the coordinator of collections and exhibitions at the University of Louisville Height Art Institute, where she also served as a lecturer in art history. And so just before we get into the conversation, we'll just lay it out a little bit here. So the Bill Fisher Award for Visual Artists is a $7,000 cash prize designed to make meaningful impact on the career of a visual artist residing in the Louisville metro area by providing support in the form of grants for the execution and exhibition of artwork and other efforts to foster a professional career as visual artist. Recipients of the Fisher Award must show a commitment to experimentation and the creative use of materials and techniques, and a commitment to pursuing a career as a professional working Louisville artist. We're going to get into talking about this in more detail, but if you want to think about applying, you go to louisvillevisualart.org/Fisher-award. And I'll say that again later. The deadline is May the 2nd, midnight, May the 2nd. So you still got plenty of time. Simone and Jessica, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Keith.
Well, Simone, I want to start with you. You're new to our town. You have been elsewhere. I think, did you just come from Oklahoma? Was that your previous?
Virginia.
Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay. And where are you from originally?
Hampton Roads, Virginia.
Okay, Hampton Roads, Virginia. Okay, cool.
Yep.
But I believe so. You are married to somebody from Louisville, originally from Louisville.
Yes, that's right. My husband grew up in the West End, went to Mail, and also went to U of L.
Okay, great. Well, I find I've always, maybe this is true of other cities, but in Louisville, I find a lot of people come back at a certain point in their life after they've been around different places. It seems, and I like that about Louisville, that people feel comfortable about doing that. So we're very glad to have you here. I'm very glad to be able to work with you on this. So far, how's it been? It's only been I don't know how long have you been in Louisville? Has it been long? A year?
Almost. So I came in August of last summer.
Okay.
Yeah. So just still kind of feeling out, but so far I've been really impressed. It feels like it has like a small hometown vibe, but there's lots to do. I really, really am impressed by the art scene, and just, the food scene, all the things. There's lots to do here.
I always like to say that it feels like it has just enough stuff going on like a big city, but it's not so big for you can't get lost in it.
Right, exactly.
So Jessica, and you've been on the show before. You and I have known each other for a long time now, but so you even more recently than Simone got her job at Community Foundation, took on this position of Public Art Administrator. How long have you been in the job now?
That is correct. I started at the end of January of this year.
Okay, and so you're a bureaucrat now.
Fortunately, though, I served on the Commission on Public Art as a commissioner for about 4 years before stepping into this role, which I gotta say really helped with the transition, because otherwise, coming in blind, it would have probably been a very steep learning curve.
Well, congratulations to both of you. So let's get into talking about the Bill Fisher Award. I find a lot of times that it seems like artists are sometimes a little confused about the Fisher Award because it is an award that seems to not have so many specific requirements, and I think that has a lot to do with, I mean, it's basically just to provide support for working artists, and that's what Bill Fisher wanted before he died. The award was established before he passed away. But let's talk a little bit, Simone, talk a little bit about how the Fish Award works. Like, how does it function coming out of the Community Foundation? And just give us a little bit about what the Community Foundation is for anybody who might not be familiar with the work that happens there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So the Community Foundation, if for anyone who doesn't know, we like to say we're a force for good. So we're basically a leader in philanthropy, and we connect donors, nonprofits, safety partners to really try and create a lasting impact in the community. So we're actually one of the largest charitable foundations here in Kentucky. And we also are really invested in the arts community. So the Bill Fisher Award is basically one of those ways that we like to try and give back. So Bill Fisher was born around 100 years ago, actually, and spent his life just making art in his community. And like many artists, had to kind of balance commitments of his passion and making a living, if you will. So he actually wanted to give a scholarship to support some Kentucky artists. And so he helped to provide grants to work artists in Kentucky. So folks who are literally living, breathing, working their art, so that they could support with studio costs, materials, things of that nature. And so they also created, with the Community Foundation and Louisville Visual Arts, basically a partnership. And it was administered by the George and Mary Atlas Hadley Prize. And so they transitioned kind of that fund from more of like a scholarship fund to more of a competitive award for working artists, which is where we are today. So we work very closely with LVA, with Keith and Amy to help administer and support that work.
Cool. And that's my coworker, Amy Chase, just to give that shout out. So, Jessica, as a curator, have you yourself filled out these sorts of submissions?
Yeah, so I have applied for curatorial grants, travel grants, things of that nature. The questions vary slightly. I do, however, I also teach at the Kentucky College of Art and Design, and I work with students in their final semester on professional practices. So all of the sort of more administrative functions that artists have to take on outside of their studio practice, the writing of the artist statement, the putting together the resumes, the organizing of all their materials for these applications. So I work with them to select sample images and whittle down all of their research statements and artist statements to the requisite 500-word limit, which is often more of a challenge than people might think. It's actually harder to say more with fewer words, but yeah, I have filled out grant applications and applied for prizes and things like that as a curator.
Well, when you work with students, and I'm hazarding to guess that you may have had conversations with more than a few artists who were trying to fill out these kinds of applications too. Is this sort of inherently unnatural for an artist to have to fill out an application like this? Is it hard for them?
I do think it's hard for them. Again, my most recent point of reference is working with students, and I tell them all the time, you're used to being given an assignment that you have to respond to within particular parameters, and it sort of puts them off kilter with open-ended grant applications like the Fisher or like the Hadley, where they're writing their own assignment and then answering it, basically. I think grants are often very sort of enigmatic to artists, that they, especially coming right out of school and maybe even not, maybe a little bit further in their career, that like, what is a grant? What does it do? How do I apply for it? And basically what I tell them is, if you were given free money, what would you do with it? And that's really what they're tasked with, very clearly outlining a meaningful application that they can, really succinctly demonstrate the impact that those funds will have on their practice and on their, career.
I mean, I think it's sort of a misnomer to imagine that you can basically be sustained by grants, but they can be an important part of your income. But and I know that when we've looked at these things, and I'm not a juror, but I see the applications that have come across over the years. There can be a real variance in the way that artists will write about themselves or present their material. I know that one of the pieces of advice that we've always tried to give to somebody who's not accustomed to doing it is to, when you write material about yourself, when you develop your statements and things like that, is to always keep them like if you fill out one grant, you basically have the foundation for the next grant, right?
I do think that that's true, although I would tell anyone that writing a grant application is the same as applying for any job. Every cover letter that you write needs to be tailored to that specific job, demonstrating, what unique skill sets you have that would be the perfect fit for this opportunity. And so, yeah, you use the same architecture and the same sort of foundation as you described, but you build it out individually for each grant application.
But you don't have to start from scratch every time you sit down to something.
No.
Particularly if you're doing a lot of them, you're going to maybe develop a range of responses. Simone, let me ask you, I know where you're working now, but have you experienced this kind of thing in your life before the Community Foundation? What kind of observations would you make?
Well, that's a great question. I've not experienced this per se. I've been on a space of hiring folks and then kind of reading through resumes and person statements in that regard, but not particularly in regard to scholarships or grants. But I do feel that each person has to be just authentically themselves and to lean in on their probably uniqueness and differences, instead of possibly trying to fit in fully into what they perceive the grant writers are looking for. Because I think ultimately, to stand out, it's not just your art, but how you confidently present that work in a written way as well.
Right. A lot of times approaching a job application, people are tempted to try to present themselves as maybe something they're not in order to try to appeal. And sort of the point of these applications as an artist is the exact opposite. Does that seem fair to say?
I would say as well, that sounds pretty much right on.
Um, so, Jessica, you've been on juries for these kinds of awards and these kinds of questions before. What pops for you when you're reviewing material? What pops for you in the submissions and applications you see? Whether it's been a Fisher or Hadley or any other kind of situation.
It's a great question. I think first and foremost, if the application is well organized and the just as a very basic first level approach is that you need to follow directions and make it as easy for your reviewer as possible. And then in addition to that, like I said before, just being able to very clearly demonstrate both a well thought through, thorough idea, and also demonstrating very clearly and concisely what your expectations and what you think that you will glean from that experience or from that, whatever the grant is providing to you. So I know one of the things that Bill Fisher is sort of, the Fisher Prize is unique in doing is that it awards basically operating funds for artists' studio practices instead of, there's no project proposal, there's no sort of deliverable required from the Fisher Prize, right? And that's a pretty unique, it's a pretty unique circumstance, particularly for arts grants, I think. And so being able to demonstrate like great use of those funds, maximizing the use of those funds, I think is really important in this prize.
Simone, what do you imagine? I know this is your first year doing this with us, and I know we're gonna have great fun working together. But as you've gotten to know this process and gotten to know, and I know there's other projects, undoubtedly, of course, that you're working on with Community Foundation. Um, do you start to imagine like the kind of thing? What's the kind of person you would imagine, or the kind of artist that pops, or that you see as kind of the recipient? Like, in other words, what's an ideal Fisher Award recipient? Have you developed that sort of thought yet, going through the process?
No pressure. I would not say ideal. I think I'm, to your point, still really grasping and learning about what this looks like being a new Louisvillian myself and coming across so many different types of artists. I'm actually really encouraged by the idea that I don't think it fits just one mold of an individual. I feel like the folks that will hopefully be applying or have already started just have a vision possibly outside of themselves alone, because the fact that art really, I feel, impacts generations, impacts community, and can be used as like a social impact tool. So I'm really excited to see folks who have work that inspires and encourages community in different ways, whether that's through social justice, mental health, any type of kind of societal thing that I think currently we're dealing with, to bring folks together and to inspire folks. I think that's someone I think would be a great recipient personally.
Okay. I have to say, I love that you call yourself a Louisvillian already. Good for you. I think it takes some people much longer.
Am I
Can
jumping the gun?
No, no, no. You're here. You have an address. You can call yourself a Louisvillian. You're very
Can I
welcome.
add on to a little bit of what Simone said? Can I also
Sure.
answer that question, Keith? So I think an ideal recipient would be one that could demonstrate that this award would break down some sort of barrier for them. So many times artists have to have side hustle, or have to have, as Simone sort of talked about, Bill Fisher even having to have his work and then his artwork, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it's really wonderful that Bill left this legacy. And I think, to speak a little bit more to what would really pop for me, or what I kind of look for, is that this is an opportunity not to necessarily reward somebody who's already been very successful or has a really well-established art practice, but is instead designed to facilitate growth and sort of create this springboard, not through exposure, but just through like basic resources. So somebody who's really going to feel a high level of impact from that, I think, it's not necessarily one type of working artist, or somebody who has ideas for a great project, but just needs that sort of basic support in order to maybe show what they're capable of.
Right. Well, Ramona Lindsay, who is Simone's colleague at the Community Foundation, she used to use the word transformative, that somebody for whom it will make this huge difference. So if we imagine an artist who has a beautiful, nice studio that they've been in for several years and things are rolling along, that's, well, of course, everybody could use that additional $7,000. But if somebody doesn't have a studio, and this will be the thing that enables them to have a space devoted to making their art. That's transformational. And there are a lot of artists I know that I've spoken to people, and I was just speaking to somebody the other day, and they're actually somebody who's been getting quite a nice reputation, but they're still doing it out of the spare room in the house, and that's the kind of thing that they're looking for, is that committed space, and it's not going to pay your rent, in perpetuity, but it gets you the foothold uh, uh, into the space, and hopefully with just enough time to see that affect your practice, affect the work, and have to have it move in a certain way. I also really love what Simone was saying, because there's not much of a requirement about the Fisher Award, but I think a lot of times what I see happen in the jury process, the ones that rise to the final conversation, the finalists, when the jury sits in a room together and really goes through things, um, I don't want to say they're project based, because that we want to emphasize that that's not what the Fish Award is about. But a lot of times they do have an idea, or sometimes it is a project, and sometimes it is about studio space. Like, there is a very specific kind of way. It's not just like, yeah, I'm paying my bills, even though that's part of it. That there is some sort of concept, some sort of idea, whether it's studio space or whether they need to buy a certain piece of equipment, if maybe they're not a painter and they need, or something else, and they need to buy. That's the kind of thing that it seems does kind of rise to the final to the finalists group in conversation. Simone, one of the things too, given that this is sort of part of your mission, as I read the introduction there, um, the sort of DEI aspect of this. Uh, we do some things. The application is available in Spanish, um, and we've tried to make an effort all the time, every year, to disseminate the word about the applications, as we did with Hadley, to the widest possible group of artists. But I'm forever finding people go like, oh, I saw you just gave out this money. I had never heard about that before. It never seems like we're reaching everybody that we could reach. So what's, and I mean, you and I, we have talked about this a little bit, but I would love to hear you talk about it now in this environment. Like, how do we push uh, to have the greatest range of applications, or at least to get the word out to the greatest range of artists?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm no expert, obviously. I'm in this work. And so I'm learning as I go as well. And this is something that comes up, I feel like, in all industries and all types of work, even though it's community based. There's a lot of communities here, especially in Louisville. It's very diverse. And I think definitely looking to organizations or kind of community-led work that are already connected to different communities is probably a really good way just to get the word out through other folks' networks. So hitting people who already have a larger network. I know for this grant, I was just kind of looking at anything that was art related across the span, but then even not just something that showed up as an art related organization, but a group of organizations, like kind of like a cohort, if you will, in the African community, right? Because though the Black community, African community might sometimes get lumped together, Africa is a lot larger and it's a different place than America. So there's different churches, resources, all the things. So connecting to groups that support individual communities, I think, is a big way. And ultimately just spreading the word out, even if it's through businesses, different groups that support business owners and entrepreneurs. There's groups within there that kind of get broken apart as well. And so typically there are folks who are in business or any different industries and may also do art as well, in addition to different schools. So just kind of putting it out through not only like the art school, but the school in general as well.
Well, I've had conversations with several BIPOC artists in town that say it's really is one of the most important issues facing Black artists, is that having space to work in and having space to exhibit and all these things, that spaces are important to them. Um, so there's a, part of me that thinks, I mean, the Fisher Award seems to be ideally suited to reach out to artists who are struggling in that way. um, but it's always a challenge. I've recognized in my position at LVA over the years that for a long time, we just always used to say, well, we put the word out, we did the thing, it's on the social media, we did our newsletter, we did all these things, and yet the greater diversity of artists hasn't connected to these opportunities. And so that it's and I don't know if it's, some of them will tell me, I don't trust those lines of communication, and I don't feel like you're designing things that matter to me, and so the challenge of getting the word out, and it doesn't mean they're going to win, but it's what the thing I always say when people talk to me about, oh, I've applied several times, or I didn't know anything about it. It's like, well, the one thing for sure is that you won't get it if you don't apply. So that's the greatest challenge, and the most important thing I feel like LVA can do is, how do we get more and more people to apply, and get the word out, and but then there's also, as we've talked about, the challenge of some of those people have never filled out an application like that before, a submission like that before. And I know that some of these applications I've seen, you can see how they're sort of answering different questions with the same language, that they're not thinking about their work maybe in some larger context or something like that. And I don't mean just Black artists, but I mean that's a very common thing. But that they're not accustomed to this kind of process, this kind of procedure, because they haven't been tuned in, or haven't had the outreach to them from other organizations and other opportunities before. So I agree with what you're saying, and I'm always looking like for other ways to connect. Um, so let me ask you, Jessica, let me go back to you for a second here. Um, that the idea about the language and the writing again, I want to go back to that, because I think that's the biggest challenge. And I know for if somebody's sitting down, they've never done anything like this, and we're also talking about sometimes these are self-educated artists, and if you've gone through a long academic career, you have a master's degree, particularly, it seems like these kind of things, I don't know if they're specifically taught to people, but if you haven't gone through that sort of experience, where somebody, where you've been pushed to think and write and articulate beyond using the paintbrush or beyond the stone, or whatever medium you're working in, it seems like academia leans into that. And so what kind of advice could we give somebody who doesn't have that sort of academic foundation, but whose work is growing, and whose work is as important to them as anybody who's been through that sort of academic foundation?
So I will tell you right now, sometimes that academic foundation can be more of a disadvantage than an advantage, because there is this idea that you need to have some sort of jargony, multisyllabic, conceptual, theoretical, philosophical artist statement, and be able to cite Kant and Nietzsche and all kinds of things as influences in your work, and that can very quickly obscure what your work is really about. It's like word salad, right? So it doesn't
Maybe you can pretend.
always. Exactly. And it doesn't always do you or your work or your proposal service to try to lean into that, because it's going to be pretty transparent that that's what you're doing. And that's always a big turnoff for me when I'm reading proposals. So instead, just tell me what your work is about. Tell me what you're doing. I mean, make sure it's grammatically correct. Make sure you're using good sentence structure and it's, you're approaching it from a professional tone, but, clear, concise, plain language is always going to be the best, because remember, how many applications do you get for the Fisher Prize, right? I mean, I remember like 90 submissions, and every submission is 5-10 pages, maybe. That's a lot of paperwork for reviewers to go through, and we go through every application. It's not like we divide it up and say you get each application is going to be reviewed 3 by 3 reviewers or whatever. It's like we go through and read every single word of every single application. And so the easier you make it on your reviewer to quickly, not to say that not every application is special and important, but like to quickly ascertain what it is that you're doing and how and why and where you're coming from, without having to read it and reread it and be like, what are they actually saying here? Where are the kernels that I'm supposed to extract from this? So yeah, I think just, you don't have to be so intimidated about not knowing all of the latest, contemporary art market trends, or, having a long art historical training to cite, but just be thorough, and your work, what you're doing, and you're the best person to speak about what you're doing. So just talk about it.
So you don't need footnotes.
No.
You don't need to be, yeah.
You don't need a bibliography for a grant application.
No. Well, I think what we're really focusing in on, though, is the authenticity of the voice in the, that it's genuine, and that you're not trying to depict yourself as something you're not, that you're not trying to make yourself look or sound like some other artist, but finding a way to voice your mission, your intention as authentically as possible.
And to also try to avoid being so self-promotional too, you don't, just be real, tell us what you're doing. You don't need to sell us in, really sort of artificial ways about, or inflate and talk about how groundbreaking or phenomenal or innovative your work is. Just talk about your work. And if it really is innovative, that will be clear.
Well, I think there's also a lot, I've seen certainly applications, and I'm sure you have too, that are basically really push the CV or the resume, like, I've done all these things. And that almost works against something like Fisher, where you sort of feel like you want to find an art. Again, I don't mean to, this threatens to sound like I'm speaking for the jurors. And I just want to say that Jessica is not a juror this year. Because that, I don't think it would have been cool to have you on in that light. But anyway, but that it's not that we're looking for an artist in need in the way that you think about, sort of like social networks and support and stuff like that. But it's like, it's not what you've done. It's like, what's this gonna do? What are you gonna do if you get the money? What is that gonna do for your practice?
Yeah, so I like to, one sort of equivalency is like the Bill Fisher Award is Louisville's MacArthur Genius Grant, right? So the MacArthur Fellowship is unrestricted funds that is not an award for past accomplishments, but it's an investment in your originality, your innovation, your promise, your potential, right? And so that's really all that Bill Fisher is designed, to accomplish. And I don't say all, that's not insignificant, right? So, and that's not to say that somebody, again, with an established artistic career could not be awarded the Fisher Prize. But for me, if I'm looking at an application that has a very lengthy CV, they clearly already have a studio or something, then maybe I'm going to look at that and I'm going to say, well, have they been working in a particular way for a while? Is there something that they're anticipating is going to change about their practice? Like, are these funds going to enable them to make they've just been waiting for the resources or the right time to shift their practice in a particular way? Or are they just asking funds so that they can continue to do what they've already obviously successfully been doing, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's where we go back to the transformative thing of somebody who hasn't been able to give themselves a better environment in which to make work, perhaps.
And I'd like to just piggyback off that, like, the equity piece of it, absolutely. To Jessica's point about really focusing on removing barriers that can impact someone's ability to thrive to an extent. And then in regards to the application, I just had some other thoughts. I have been through just a grant writing kind of workshop for my own knowledge, and I do know that some grants sometimes have previous winners applications able to be something that folks can view just as kind of a little guide. So that could potentially be something to consider adding in the future. And then I also had a random thought with the idea of having basically like a video application potentially. So I know some folks maybe don't find strengths in writing, but they're really good with sharing and processing out loud. So I'm thinking of auditions for theater or any type of acting, sometimes even interviews for jobs now. You can do a video and send that in. And then Legally Blonde, when Elle was applying to law school, she added her own flavor and you could really see her personality. So that's potentially just another idea in addition to the other piece. And then lastly, I was thinking potentially hosting some type of workshop around the application in specific communities that you're trying to reach. So whether that's like for instance, Roots 101, they have a community, like an open community art show coming up in April. And so maybe someone like them could host an event that could be something engaging and fun and interesting in addition to, oh, we're gonna have this, period of time dedicated to preparing you to really work on your grant writing skills to continue your progress as an artist or something like that.
Right. Well, and it's interesting. I've never thought about making previous applications available. I'm sure there's a way to do that that isn't, I don't know, violating an artist's privacy. And I will say that if anybody has questions about the application or about the process, I'm available at keith@louisvillevisualart.org. Or you could call the office phone 502-584-8166. I love talking to artists. So I'd be happy to have those conversations because and it's actually, for me personally, this is the time that I can encourage and push people, because at some point it becomes the purview of the jurors, and then at that point, Simone, you and I are like, I don't know, referees or something, it's like we're impartial to it all. But there are so many, and I look around and I know there's dozens of people deserving of this award, and not all of them have ever applied. Many people that I think are deserving have not applied before. But I always want to encourage anybody who's, I sometimes feel like artists are very good at finding reasons not to do things, not to apply, and I think that's foolish and just the wrong approach to take. I would like to see 100 applications. I don't know if the jurors that are going to help us this year would like to hear me say that, but I would love to see 100 applications, and because there's no doubt in my mind there's 100 people who could apply.
I also want to point out too, Keith, that for the artists who have said, oh, I didn't get it, or oh, I've applied a couple of times and I wasn't selected, that doesn't necessarily mean that it was a fruitless exercise. I can tell you that I've been on jury panels or, selection committees before where there wasn't, maybe the artist application wasn't particularly just appropriate for what we were selecting, or they weren't the strongest candidate, but their application was still strong and maybe they made it in the top 5 or top 3. And, I always, as much as I can, or, when it's not a blind jury, try to reach out to those artists if I have their contact information and tell them like, hey, this was a really good application, it didn't make it, or, hey, check out this opportunity instead, and I've had a couple of artists who have said like, oh, I did apply for that other opportunity and I didn't get the one that I applied for where you became familiar with my work, but I did get the one that you referred me to. So always like just keep that in mind so that you don't you never know who's going to be seeing your application, whose eyes are going to be on your stuff. And it could be, a means to a different end and provide other opportunities and open other doors for you. Because
Right.
I have learned of artists that way too. It's not the case that when I'm on a selection committee that I'm already familiar with all 90 applicants. And I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting body of work. I'd like to get to know that artist's work more. And, it's really sort of surreptitious in a lot of ways. So
Right. Well, and just to we don't say who the names of the jurors are because it's not fair to them because they are from the community, and we don't want them to be but whatever. But I will say that usually what we do is there are 5 people and we ask them all to come in with a certain number of names. So that final jurors conversation, there are, I don't know, 6 to 12 artists' names that are in that conversation where the applications are out and they're all being discussed. It is I don't know. It's nice. One of the things we do is we ask a previous winner to come and be on the juror, and it's always interesting. They're very surprised, I think, by the process, and I think a lot of people that fill out these applications, I wonder what they think happens, like what is the process the jurors go through. So I think you're right that there's a lot of eyes go on there, and I've seen some awfully good applications come so close. I mean, it's almost never just like, wow, let's just throw the other 89 out because here's the clear winner. There are some really strong applications that get into that final conversation, and I know they stick in my mind, even though I'm not a juror.
I
They,
mean, I
they
can tell you every year there's been at least, it gets down every year. Somebody says, I wish we could give out more than one, and wouldn't that be great?
Well, but I think, I see the Fisher Prize in terms of what the financial opportunities for grants and support in the city are. I think the Fisher Prize is sort of the premium one. There's some other really important support provided. Great Meadows Foundation is the one that I think that has probably touched more people than anything. But those are smaller amounts, and this is sort of, to me, it's like the premium. It's the premium visual art prize in Louisville. And I know we're proud to be a part of that, and that the Community Foundation has asked us to partner over all these years. Simone, I want to give you the last word. I feel like maybe Jessica and I dominated this a little bit. I want to give you the last word before we wrap this up.
Oh, I appreciate that. And honestly, y'all know more of the work more than I do, so that's not a problem at all. I was curious to Jessica's point for folks who may want that type of feedback on how the judges viewed their work, or jurors rather. Is that something that y'all offer just in general, or do they reach out? Could they get that feedback or something of that nature?
Well, I'll answer that. There's 2 points. I will say one of the things that we did last year, and I did not hear that anybody, because they would have come through me. There were several past winners who agreed to provide some advice if anybody was filling out the application. And not that I didn't want to saddle somebody with like trying to talk to 10 people and getting all lined up in all sorts of things, but because they all have lives and work and stuff. But just if there was anybody that really felt like, I just want a pair of eyes to look over my application before I turn it in, and nobody took advantage of that. But I think that would be the kind of thing that we could do. But also, we have had jurors that, again, some of those last conversations have been tough, like, oh, so hard to finally get down to that last person. It's not so hard to get down to 5, but it can be hard when you get down. And we have had jurors say, look, is it permissible for me to reach out to that person and speak to them and talk to them? And, we said, Yes, I think it is because you're only going to help them. You're only going to, we want them to reapply next year, and to apply to other things. So we do that. That is permissible if the jurors feel so inclined. And I would say we've had several jurors that were so inclined, and I have a feeling that there might be even some looser conversation that happens out in when the jurors go out into the world after the fact. So yeah, and I'm always happy to give some feedback. I don't spend probably as much time as the average juror reading through them since I'm not a juror, but I do know those last ones that come into the meeting pretty well. So sure. Well, I got to wrap it up, you guys. All of a sudden I looked up and there's 45 minutes has gone by. So thank you so much, Simone Sibley-McBride from the Community Foundation of Louisville, and Jessica Kincaid, the Public Art Administrator for Louisville Metro Government. We're here talking about the Fisher Award, and again, let me just put a period to it. The deadline is May the 2nd, midnight of May the 2nd. That's a Monday. And the Bill Fisher Award for Visual Artists is a $7,000 cash prize that's designed to basically provide supporting funds for an artist. And you can apply by going to louisvillevisualart.org /Fisher-award. Just go to our website and go under adult stuff and opportunities, and you'll find a page all about Fisher. There's you can fill out the application in Spanish if that is helpful to you, and again, please don't hesitate to contact me, Keith Waits, Keith at Louisville Visual Art at Louisville Visual Art, if you have any questions about this. But thank you, Simone, and thank you, Jessica.
Thank you for
Thank you.
having us.